Mississippi Delta, once the center of slavery and cotton, and later, the birthplace of the blues.
Muddy Waters, Albert King, Jimmy Reed, Johnny Hooker, B.B. King, every one of them came from a little bitty area in the Delta.
Riley B. King was born September 16, 1925, on a cotton plantation just outside of Indianola, Mississippi. His father was a sharecropper, and Riley picked cotton from an early age.
What else you do? It was just all farming. There wasn't no factories and stuff like that where we could work 5 or 6 days a week and get paid. You know, you worked all the year long.
Riley was raised by his mother, who died of diabetes when he was 9. His grandmother died 5 years later, and not long after that, he lived alone, working the fields from 4 a.m. to 7 at night.
He really worked hard, yeah. He worked hard picking cotton. You see how you pick cotton, everything, drive the tractors and stuff like that.
I remember him telling me how poor it was. He was telling me about he was to plow all day for $2 a day. When you break it down, it's about 22 cents an hour.
Most of the family members didn't really come to his aid when their mother died. He kind of became a man that day his grandmother died.
I'm amazed at the fact that he became the person he was with the things that he saw and the things that occurred around him as he was growing up. His schoolmates and people that he knew, the youngsters from his time, hanging from trees after being lynched.
Whenever he would have that conversation and he would lead away from it, I'd say to myself, there's something you don't want to tell me.
If B.B. King would have put his life, how he had to deal life in his songs, it would have been too deep. You know, it's too deep. I can't listen to this.
One source of comfort and hope was music. A local preacher taught Riley some chords on the guitar, and it wasn't long before he discovered the blues.
In that time, Indianola had some real nightlife, like Count Basie, for instance, like Sonny Boy Williamson. Riley was too young to get in, so he would be hovering at the back door. He'd be looking through the window. He'd be looking through the gaps. And this was a world that for him was just so compelling.
While still in his teens, Riley joined a group called the famous St. John Gospel Singers that performed in churches and on local radio.
When I would play a gospel song, people would always pat me on the head, the shoulders, and they would compliment me. That was good, boy, that was nice. But they didn't put nothing in the hat.
Okay.
So when people asked me to play blues, they'd pat me on the head, put something in the hat.
The blues afforded B.B. as well as a whole lot of other people to get out of a situation that was dire, that was just wicked and wrong.
This was the world he was born into. And rather than blame everybody, he worked at getting the hell out of there, you know, and not just physically, but mentally too. He was no longer going to be anybody's slave. And he just did it by making people joyful. That was his ticket to ride.
It wasn't long before Riley was getting some attention and love. In 1944, he married his church sweetheart, Martha Denton. 4 years later, he headed to Memphis, where he landed a gig at an all-black radio station, WDIA, by writing a jingle for a local health tonic.
Pepticon, Pepticon sure is good. You can get it anywhere in your neighborhood. Bang. You're hired. So Riley starts as the Pepticon boy. That did very well, and they gave him a new name, the Beale Street Blues Boy. That was quickly shortened to Blues Boy, and that was shortened to B.B.
B.B. quickly became a regional star with a sound that was special from the start.
He learned to bend them notes like nobody could.
And he's the first one did it. And when he did it, he's the master of it.
He would make that note sing. And it had that trail that he did.
B.B.'s sound that everyone keeps talking about was in his fingers, you know, and in his soul.
In 1951, B.B. set up a makeshift studio in an all-black YMCA in Memphis and cut a remake of a 1948 Lowell Fulson hit, 3 O'Clock Blues.
Now it is 3 o'clock in the morning. Can't even close my eyes. Oh, 3 o'clock in the morning, baby. Can't even.
When you're feeling bad or that woman that left you, 3 o'clock is a tough time, and that was the time he was singing about.
Well, I can't find my baby. Lord, and I can't be satisfied.
And all of a sudden I heard 3 o'clock in the morning. When I heard that, that was the end of me listening to the rest of the guitar players. B.B. King just blowed out the lights for me. So I said, I don't know what he's doing, but whatever he's doing is pleasing my ear.
If I don't find my baby, I'm going down to the bowling ground. That's where the men hang out at.
B.B. King's 1951 breakout hit, 3 O'Clock Blues, spent 5 weeks at the top of the Billboard R&B charts. He followed that success with a string of top 10 singles and hit the road with a pioneering 13-piece ensemble, the first to marry country blues with a big band R&B sound.
That big sound, that big full sound, he loved that. And the orchestration, he liked bands with horns.
He said, do you want a gig? I said, well, yeah. He said, well, you're the first person I'm hiring in my original band. We had tailor-made, not no loud, glaring suits. B.B. wanted you to look respectful, and we were.
You can't stereotype him and put him in a pair of overalls and pants. He came out with the blues dressing the way he felt. And he made the blues look good when he came out.
B.B.'s new look was matched by his evolving sound. And his 1956 single, Sweet Little Angel, became a concert staple that let his soulful stylings shine.
His technique was that he could make his guitar sing. That nobody around had a guitar that sung.
He didn't have any tricks. He had no pedals. It was built into his hands, which were connected to his heart.
I've got a sweet little angel. I love the way she spread her wings.
He wasn't talking about an angel. He wasn't talking about nothing flying. He was talking about a woman. He loved the way she spread her wings.
Mr. King, as he put it, loved the women. So there were a lot of women within his lifetime.
Yes, when she spread her wings around me, people. Yeah. I got joy and everything.
He would say, sweetheart this, and honey this, and pretty girl. So he had this language that a woman desired hearing.
That hair all laid out and stuff. And with that guitar, who wouldn't? I wish I'd been old enough at that time when he was, you know, out there hot.
By the mid-50s, B.B. was supporting kids from at least 3 different mothers, none of whom happened to be his wife. After 8 years of marriage, he and Martha Denton called it quits.
B.B. King was the type of man that wishes he could have been at home with a family and raise his kids. But he would say, if you're gonna do this business, You should probably stay single.
Married or single, the Rhode was B.B.'s home. Touring with his signature guitar, dozens of which were called Lucille, he averaged well over 300 dates a year and logged a staggering 356 in 1956.
They would drive 800 miles, set up the equipment, play for 6 hours, tear the equipment down, drive another 700 miles.
There wasn't no 300 seaters or something like that. They always playing for like 100 or maybe less than 100 people in some of the clubs they was playing.
We would get to cities and no hotel. You could not stay in a hotel. We don't serve blacks, because we don't serve colors.
He told me several times he was just making enough money to make it to the next town, and a lot of the promoters didn't pay him then.
Being a slave to the road may have been a reason why B.B. liked to open many of his shows with his 1955 hit, Every Day I Have the Blues.
Every day I have the blues. Every day I have the blues. When you see me worried, honest, I hate the blues.
Every day you have the blues. But the blues ain't always something that you cry about. It ain't always something you smile about. 'Cause the same thing makes you laugh. The same thing will make you cry.
Nobody loves me. Nobody seems to care. Yes, nobody loves me. Nobody seems to care. Thinking of worries and troubles, you know I've had my share.
He would sing that song so passionately. You could tell that every song that he did had a meaning behind it, and there was a story there somewhere, a real live story.
While B.B. was grinding it out on the road, R&B artists like Chuck Berry and Little Richard were crossing over to rock. But B.B. and the blues couldn't jump on that train.
He was included in some national tours, which featured very popular black musicians like Jackie Wilson or Lloyd Price, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and sometimes he would be booed. You know, get that blues off, we want the star.
The audience booed him, the black audience. And he said that was the first time he cried on stage. He said, it hurt me because down in Mississippi, the white man wouldn't let me drink the same water. And they didn't like me either. Made me feel like I was black twice.
B.B. King had been playing, you know, the circuit. You know, they used to call it TOBA circuit. Tough on a black ass. And knocking them dead. But that was the ceiling that he was going to get to.
For B.B., that ceiling was more than personal.
Until the day he died, he felt that blues music didn't get the respect that it was due. He felt that it was the foundation for most of the music, if not all the music, that you hear today.
He knew that the blues had been neglected in a pretty racial way. So I think he saw that, therefore, so would he be unless he had elevated it. And in elevating the blues, he would be able to take the ride along with it.
In 1964, B.B. vented his frustrations on a single titled, How Blue Can You Get?
I say I've been downhearted, baby. Ever since the day we met.
And when you think about B.B. King, you can't get no blues than that. How blue can you get? If that don't fit B.B. King, nothing will.
I gave you a brand new Ford, but you said I want a Cadillac.
B.B. was brilliant with a great lyric. When the words were on the page, they were different words when they came out of his mouth.
I gave you 7 children,
women children. Now you want to give them back. You can hear all the women screaming and all the men going, yeah, yeah, that's what happened to me.
How Blue Can You Get was part of B.B.'s 1965 Live at the Regal album, a landmark recording that helped revive interest in the blues, and not just among blacks.
All of the white kids that listened to blues music, from the Rolling Stones to Led Zeppelin to whomever, took it and ran with it and played it in the way they played it, but they were inspired because of B.B. King and others like him.
But despite their success, B.B. was still on the Chitlin circuit and struggling to make ends meet.
Talk about B.B. King working 300-something days a year. You know why we worked like that? You needed 400 days in the year. You just wasn't there in order to make a decent living.
It didn't help that B.B. now had a gambling habit that was adding to the stress. The IRS clamped a $78,000 lien on his earnings in 1966. He hit bottom when Sue Carol Hall, a teenager he married in 1958, filed for divorce after 8 years.
She wanted to have a home and a husband at home with her. He did try. You know, he was very much in love with her. But no woman could maintain my dad from the road. Only Lucille had his undivided attention.
But B.B.'s fortunes were about to turn. His new manager, Sid Seidenberg, was determined to hook him up with an enthusiastic new audience that was developing around the blues. B.B. couldn't believe it. Literally.
He pulled up to the Fillmore West and saw the long-haired white hippie kids all over the place and didn't see any blacks. And he thought he was at the wrong venue. Bill Graham came out and said, no, you're at the right place.
I couldn't help myself. I cried. I'd never had that happen to me before, ever in life. And they stood there and they cheered, and they would cheer and they screamed. And man, I tell you, the best ever happened to me. That was a night I'll never forget as long as I can think.
The success that was prepared for him had come together in this one moment. There was an audience that was waiting for him, and here he came.
Making the most of the moment, B.B. recorded 4 LPs in 1968 and 69. And he cut a single that answered a question he was getting a lot, now that his audience included whites.
Everybody wanna know why I sing the blues. Everybody wanna know.
Why I Sing the Blues was an instant classic that B.B. performed for the rest of his career, often surrounded by the superstar support that reflected his breakthrough to the mainstream. And as his audience expanded, so did his sound.
I wanted to put some different musicians around him because in my mind, he was making the same album over and over and over again, and I wanted to infuse some youthful energy into that. I wanted the energy of rock music to go with an R&B bass.
The result was a stunning remake of a straight-ahead R&B hit from 1951.
Thrill is gone. Thrill is gone away. Thrill is gone, baby.
It was up-tempo and better than the rest of them. The Thrill is Gone just had a beat and groove, and it was everything.
That song was something that everybody could relate to. You used to feel real good about it, but you just don't feel that way no more.
You know you done me wrong, baby, and you're gonna be sorry someday. Thrill is gone.
Your typical blues song had what? Harmonica, little guitar. This had strings, it had orchestration. No other song up until that time was doing anything like that.
started it off. It had a big white audience and had a big black audience. It opened up every door in the world for him.
The Thrill Is Gone soared to number 15 on the pop charts, BB's first top 20 crossover hit. It also won a Grammy, and BB was suddenly in demand on primetime and elsewhere. By the end of 1970, he was opening for the Rolling Stones.
When he started doing the Rolling Stones and started playing with all these other people, then his audience had broadened. So personally, he broadened himself to include that in.
But despite the breakthroughs, BB was never far from his roots. In 1971, he went to Cook County Jail, and a year later, Sing Sing, and gave the inmates his toughest stuff.
Is gone, baby. He was very into not losing his audience that he had. And your love is growing cold. There he was, man, and he rose to the occasion. I believe to my soul, baby, that you're giving me some outside help that I don't think I really need. Now I want you to tell the Iceman, the next time he better leave some ice. And I want you to tell the post.
BB won over that crowd, and you want to talk about tough crowds. This was the toughest.
And when I come home from work in the morning, it better still be some groceries on the shelf. And I want you to tell that slick insurance man that he better write some insurance on his bill.
I kind of identify myself with the inmates, thinking in terms, had it not been for a lot of the people that I was associated with during my youth, it's very possible that I could have been behind bars, as some of the inmates are.
Over the next 25 years, BB would give 50 free concerts in prisons around the U.S. Meanwhile, Live in Cook County Jail shot to the top of the R&B charts, BB's first and only album to go #1. It looked like he had finally lifted himself and the blues firmly into the mainstream. The musical revolution of the 1960s that helped make B.B. King a crossover star gave way in the 70s to other revolutions. Disco was not kind to B.B. and the blues, and by the middle of the decade, after 30 years in the game, he was slumping once again.
The Thrill Is Gone was a big hit, and since that time, his career had kind of ebbed, and you can only go so far on one record.
A lot of the black audience graduated to funk and eventually hip-hop and rap and so on.
By 1972, BB had landed a first for the blues standing gig at the Hilton in Vegas, but that became a dicey deal.
BB would play Keno almost 24 hours a day. We would come to the show, BB was sitting in the Keno lounge playing already, and then after all the show's over with, he was still there playing again.
There were times when he would walk around the casino with his head down, and people thought that it was because he was feeling a certain way. But what he was actually doing was looking for money on the floor, because he had spent it all.
And I said to him, why don't you just get out of Vegas, man? Well, and he says, oh, I got to find a way to get past this without having to run from it. And he beat it. He beat it.
BB did that by going back to the studio for a pair of jazzy blues LPs with the Crusaders, and by hitting the road and turning himself into a global ambassador for the music he loved.
We played 90 countries around the world. We went to Singapore, we went to Malaysia. And the people came out, I mean, they came out and knew the songs.
His whole attitude was, I'm gonna show the world that the blues is just as good as symphony music, Bach or Beethoven or what have you. The blues is just as good as that. And it's real.
But BB's life on the road wasn't just about promoting the blues. He had been single since the 60s, but never lonely.
He He was the most respectful, dirty old man I ever met. One of the great stories about B.B. is he would travel with this old-fashioned three-pronged loose-leaf book that was a phone book, and he would have descriptions of the women, how he met them, because most everyone in the phone book were women.
He'd rent out a floor and have a woman in every room on that floor, and he'd just go from room to room at various points during the evening, during his stay, and see who he was going to see.
Whenever we'd have a conversation, he would always lead back to a woman. I'm ready to talk music like me and you talk now. And he would sit up, look at that, and there's a woman walking by. I'm like saying, I see that, B.B. So, man, let's talk about music. But that was his joy. You know, he would say, yeah, a good-looking woman brought him here, and if a good-looking woman take him away, that's the way he wanted to leave.
By the start of the 1990s, B.B. King was the grand old man of the blues, performing around the world and appearing regularly in primetime sitcoms like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and The Cosby Show. B.B. further raised his profile and that of the blues when he signed a licensing deal to use his name and likeness for the B.B. King Blues Club in Memphis, the first of several clubs nationwide.
I think the clubs are very, very meaningful to him because he knew that some kind of way there would be a legacy left behind him, that the people would come and they could be introduced to the blues if they had never heard it before.
B.B.'s legacy was assured in other ways. Over a 70-year career, he played more than 15,000 shows, sold over 40 million records, and performed in more than 90 countries. But the number that really stands out is 15. That's how many kids B.B. provided for, each one from a different mom.
His father told him, if you slept there and they come and say it's your baby, it's your baby. And actually, my father went on and lived that.
He believed he had a lot of kids. He said, I don't really know. He said, but you feed them long enough, they'll look like you.
Turns out, B.B. probably wasn't the biological father of any of his children, but he didn't care.
His first wife took him to the doctor, and he was tested to see why, you know, she wasn't able to get pregnant, and it was supposed to have been the low sperm count.
Whether he was or not, they, you know, I mean, he owned them all. This is my daughter right here, this is my son right here. They took care of one of them, so you treat all of them the same.
He took care of every single person, but he was always apologizing because sometimes some of us, including myself, would make him feel guilty that he wasn't there. I would say sometime to him, I would have gave him the money back if he had gave me a day or two in his lifetime. And I think that made him feel pretty bad because money does not replace the person.
I don't think he felt like he ever paid enough for that. I don't think he never really had peace of mind.
There was one other debt that B.B. felt he needed to repay. To his roots in the Delta. He returned every year and performed there for free.
I'm the jokester in the band, so I'm saying, man, y'all see this place? Grass growing on the damn stage. That's terrible. He stops me. You don't like this place? You think it's funny? Well, son, this is where I grew up. I was one of those people. I still am. I just got a little money. And when you make fun of them, son, you're making fun of me. And that touched me, and it was like one of those teaching moments that was really something that hit home.
It's such a warm feeling to go back to Indianola. I know that this is home. You know, out of the many places I've gone and whatever happened from place to place, that is still home, and the people still receive me as home.
By the time B.B. celebrated his 89th birthday, he had a Lifetime Achievement Grammy, a Presidential Medal of Freedom, and a museum celebrating his life and work in Indianola. And when he died on May 14th, 2015, of complications due to diabetes, his final procession from Memphis to Indianola was fit for a king.
We started making our way down Beale, and it started to hit me that I was saying goodbye to the last semblance of what real blues was to me in my world.
In a procession from Beale Street in Memphis to Indianola, a trip that should have taken an hour and a half to 2 hours took 7 hours because so many people were there.
St. Peter says, well, how many people did you help? You're gonna have like 20 billion people behind that B.B. helped.
Every time you hear a guitar player now and he hit one note, I don't have to ask him. I say, you know B.B. King.
When you heard him, you heard the blues. You heard the blues that was from the cotton fields, from the poor people. This is B.B., who related to the people that came to hear him.
You always see these sayings, keep the blues alive, keeping the blues alive. With B.B. was the other way. The blues kept us alive.
His legacy is that he introduced America to its own music. And that's about as big a legacy as you could have.
I've been downhearted, babe.
Long before he got ill, we used to sit and have a drink, man, and talk, and then we would be talking just like you and I, and they would say, if you leave here before me, I leave before you, don't let the blues die.
You know, awful love is nothing but the blues.
And that's the message, just don't let the blues die.
Baby, how